Picture this, it's midnight and you've climbed down to a crypt, willingly. Above you stands a ruined palace, untouched by the living for years. Below you, in the stone, there's the smell of cold rot. And there's something else, something sweetish, spoiled, that settles in the back of your throat and just doesn't want to leave. You have a job. And one single, simple rule. Keep the thing that lives down here away from its coffin until the third crow of the cock. If the sun comes up and it hasn't crawled back into the cold stone, the curse is broken. The monster becomes a human being again. So the theory goes. You hear her before you see her. Not footsteps, a scraping, claws on granite, a wet, heavy breathing far too big for a girl's throat. And then the sound that freezes your blood. A clattering, teeth, 2 rows of them, one behind the other. She comes out of the darkness on all fours. Her jaw gapes from one ear to the other. Her fingers end in claws. And yet, beneath the matted hair, in the shape of the shoulders, you recognize it. This once was a little girl, a princess even. 5 hours until dawn. And she caught your scent long ago. Don't run. If you run, you're dead. Stand your ground and pray the cock crows before she reaches you.
Tick, tick, down the hall. Great tales, call it by name. Great tales, shadows remain. Tick, 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 time keeps its stare. Great tales, something is there.
Hello and welcome back to Great Tales. I'm Chris and I'm glad to have you here. This is part 2 of our little series on the real myth behind the monsters of The Witcher. Last time we stood in the shimmering heat of the noonday field and met Lady Midday, a white figure in the merciless light of day. A woman who became a threat because society needed a face to pin on heat stroke. Remember the thought we closed on. Tell me what a people fears, and I tell you whom it wanted to protect and whom it abandoned. Today we descend from the bright noon hour down into the dark, into a crypt. Because the creature we're talking on today isn't just any monster from the Witcher universe. It is the monster, the very first one. The creature that started the whole story of Geralt of Rivia in the first place. In Polish, she's called the Striga. In English, the Striga. And I promise you, behind her lies one of the richest, oldest, and most disturbing myths Europe has to offer. A myth that reaches all the way back to the ancient Romans. And one that, just a few years ago, in 2022, came back into the light at a Polish field. But let's take it in order. Part 2 of 4. Take one more deep breath, pour yourself a glass, get comfortable, let's go. The birth of a hero and a monster. Let's start where it all began. In December 1986, a short story appeared in the Polish magazine Fantastyka under the plain title Wiedźmin, The Witcher. It was written by the then completely unknown traveling salesman in his mid-40s, Andrzej Sapkowski. Nobody suspected that this one story would grow into a global phenomenon. Novels, games, a Netflix series, an entire empire. And the monster at the heart of the very first story? A Striga. The plot is quickly told, and if you know the games, you'll recognize it at once, because it forms the intro to the very first Witcher game from 2007. King Foltest of Temeria has a dark secret. He fathered a child with his own sister Ada. Mother and child died in birth, and they were buried together in a single coffin. 7 years later, the dead child rises from the crypt as a Striga, a monster that ravages the region by night, tears people apart, holds the whole court in terror. But Foltest doesn't want his daughter dead. He wants her saved. And that's exactly where Geralt comes in. The Witcher knows the rule I gave you in the intro. Keep the Striga away from her sarcophagus for just one whole night until the third crow of the cock, and the curse breaks. Geralt spends the night in the crypt, fights the creature, and at the decisive moment lies down in her empty coffin himself, so she can't get back in. At sunrise, he finds a naked, ordinary little girl on the floor. He leans over her, and in one last spasm, she slashes his throat open with her claws. Geralt barely survives, The princess is saved, henceforth called Adder the White, for her hair turned white, but marked, damaged, and never quite safe from relapse. A perfect dark little story, and now comes the part hardly anyone knows. The real origin, Roman Zmorski, 1852. Because Sapkowski didn't invent the story, not entirely anyway. Shortly after publication in 1986, a reader's letter arrived at the Fantastyka editorial office with a serious accusation: plagiarism. The reader had recognized something, because nearly the entire plot of Sapkowski's Wiedźmin already exists in a text over 130 years older, in the fairy tale Striga, by the Polish poet and folklorist Roman Zmorski, published in 1852 in his collection Legends and Tales of the People of Mazowszu. In Zmorski, it's all already there. The king, the cursed child, the Striga and the crypt, the knights of holding out, the third crow of the cock, the redemption. Sapkowski took the skeleton of this old folk legend almost one-to-one. But, and this is the crucial thing, and it speaks directly to our guiding question, he completely changed the spirit of the story. Look at what Zmorski tells us in 1852. The hero isn't called Geralt, but Marcin. Marcin is a poor, pious, brave orphan boy. He survives the night at the crypt not through potions, silver and magic, but through prayer and faith in God. He makes the sign of the cross. He holds out because his faith is stronger than the evil. And in the end? In the end, he marries the redeemed, beautiful princess and becomes a just king. A classic fairy tale. The good triumphs, faith prevails, and love wins. And now compare that with Sapkowski, 1986. Geralt is no pious orphan boy. He's a paid professional, a mercenary with a sword and witch's potions. He doesn't pray, he calculates. He casually kills men in taverns. He uses a man as a live bait. There's no wedding, no throne, no triumph. Only a wrecked little princess and a witcher with a slashed open throat who pockets his fee and moves on. Do you see what has happened here? The same skeleton of a story, but told by two completely different worlds. One, 19th century Poland, tells a fairy tale about faith, virtue and the divine order. The other, Poland at the end of communism, tells a disillusioned story about money, morality in shades of grey, and a world in which no one is safe without bleeding for it. Who tells the story and why? Here you see it in its purest form on one and the same monster. The name, an owl of the ancient Rome. But let's go deeper still, because Zmorski didn't invent the Striga either. He wrote down a genuine, legendary figure that the rural folk of Mazowszu had known for centuries. And her name leads us far out of Poland, all the way to Italy, all the way to ancient Rome. As Slavic as the word Striga may sound, it's a loan word from Latin. The great Polish linguist Alexander Bruckner worked this out more than a century ago. Striga comes from the Latin strix, meaning screech owl, and the strix in ancient Rome wasn't merely a bird. She was a night demon, an uncanny bird that slipped through windows in the dark and sucked the blood and tore the flesh of small children in their cradles. This isn't speculation. You can read it in the Roman poet Ovid, in his work the Fasti, written around the year 8 AD. Ovid describes these streaks precisely. Great heads, fixed staring eyes, hooked beaks, greyish feathers. And he tells how they fall upon the little prince Proca in his cradle and rip open his chest. The child is saved by a goddess wielding a spring of the whitethorn. Even the remedy may sound familiar to you. Whitethorn against bloodsuckers. And even the skeptical Ovid in the end won't commit himself to whether these beings are real birds or transformed witches. And this one Latin root, strix, has left descendants all across Europe. In Italian, it became Striga, the witch. In Romanian, Strigoi, the famous undead that later inspired Stoker's Dracula. In Albanian, the Striga, and in Polish, the Striga. A single ancient bird demon that spread across 2,000 years and a dozen languages. The next time you hear the word witch in Italian, think of the owl from Ovid's verses. 2 souls, 2 hearts, 2 rows of teeth. But what in Polish folk belief actually turned a person into a Striga in the first place? And here it gets truly interesting and truly eerie. The answer the old legends give: some people are born with 2 souls. Sometimes it's said with 2 hearts, or in the most famous sign, with 2 rows of teeth, the second of which is often barely visible. As long as such a person lives, you might notice nothing about them. But when they die, only one of the 2 souls leaves the body, the second stays, and it wakes the corpse again. This reawakened Strzyga has to feed in order to sustain its second life. It drinks blood, it eats entrails, it falls upon livestock and night travelers. And very often the legends say it flies about at night in the form of an owl. There she is again, the Strix, the screech owl, right through 2000 years. Its revenge falls first on those who wronged it in life, and most cruelly on its own family. The signs by which future Strigi were thought to be recognizable at birth are carefully documented in the folklore record. The ethnographer Szymon Gonet noted such markers in 1897 in the journal Lud, among them the absence of armpit hair. Other sources name 2 rows of teeth, being born already toothed, a joint eyebrow, a so-called caul, red hair, all of them real, congenital peculiarities. And the child who bore one of them was often cast out of the community while still small, marked, suspect, a monster before it ever had a chance to be a person. Hold on to that thought, we'll come back to that in the end. Quickly before we open the crypt, if you are enjoying this series, if you like digging up the real myth behind the monsters with me, then please drop a like and a subscribe. It costs you nothing and helps the channel enormously, especially with a multi-part series like this one. You are the one who keeps this channel alive, and for that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You could say you're my second soul. Without you, this channel wouldn't keep breathing. Right, enough kind words, let's go down. How to bury a Striga. If you believe that the dead came back, then you had to take precautions. And the precautions of the Slavic country folk took against Striga are so drastic that they will take your breath away. The most common method, decapitation. You cut off the suspect's head, but you make sure that you don't bury it where it belongs. You bury it between the feet or the legs. The logic behind it is coldly consistent. If the Striga wakes and tries to rise, she first has to go looking for her own head. Other methods? Burial face down, so that if the corpse wakes and digs upward, it actually digs ever deeper into the earth. An aspen stake or an iron nail driven through the body. A brick or a slip of paper bearing a holy word placed under the tongue. Or in my favorite variant, because it's so humanely clever, use scattered poppy or millet seeds into the grave. Because the Striga, it was believed, was gripped by a compulsion. She had to count, grain by grain, and while she counted, the night passed until the saving crow of the cock forced her back into the earth for good. And all of this would be just a grisly footnote of folklore if we didn't have solid proof that people actually believed that. The graves of Drawsko and Pień. In 2014, a research team led by bioarchaeologist Leslie Georgica published a study in the respected journal PLOS ONE about a cemetery in Drawsko, northwestern Poland, from the 17th and 18th centuries. Among roughly 285 graves, there were 6 deviant burials. In 5 of them, an iron sickle lay across the throat or abdomen of the dead, placed so that when a corpse is sitting up, it would have beheaded or disemboweled itself. In 2, a heavy stone lay on the throat. And here's the fascinating thing of the isotope analysis that the teeth revealed. These vampires were not strangers, not migrant outsiders as had long been assumed. They were locals, neighbors, people from the village itself. Probably, the researchers concluded, victims of an epidemic, because when many people suddenly died for no understood reason, you went looking for a culprit among the dead. And then, in August 2022, the discovery that made headlines around the world. A team from Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, led by Professor Dariusz Polinsky, opened up the grave in Pień, and it was the grave of a young woman, perhaps 17 or 18 years old. Across her throat, an iron sickle, and on the big toe of her left foot, a triangular padlock, as if to lock her into the ground forever, a double insurance against her return. She wore a silk cap with gold and silver thread, so she was no outsider, but someone of status. They gave her the name Zosia, and in 2024, a Swedish archaeologist reconstructed her face. And do you know what the face shows? No monster, a young girl, a young woman with, as the examination found, slightly protruding front teeth and a condition that probably gave her fainting spells and headaches. Perhaps, and we can't say for sure, exactly the kind of difference that a superstitious village would declare to be a Striga. Remember this face. It is the true face behind our monster. The literary echo, Gogol's V. Before we come to the big question, a brief detour. Because the scene from our intro, the hero who has to hold out alone at night by a rising corpse, is far older than Sapkowski. It's even older than Zmorski. In 1835, the Ukrainian-Russian writer Nikolai Gogol published a horror story called V, based on Ukrainian folklore. In it, a theology student named Koma has to keep watch alone for 3 nights in a remote, decaying church over the body of a beautiful young woman, reading psalms over her. A woman who, in truth, is a witch. And night after night, she rises from a coffin. The first 2 nights, he protects himself by a chalk circle and a prayer. But on the 3rd night, she summons a whole horde of demons, led by a monster named V. Do you recognize the pattern? A dead young woman rising from a coffin at night. A lone man who has to last out several nights. The church, the crypt, the threshold of dawn. There's even a closely related variant from the Carpathians, in which the rising woman is a king's daughter the hero must guard, and in which he saves himself by lying down beside the coffin. That's almost word for word Geralt's trick. This story is an ancient European narrative pattern, and Sapkowski, like all great storytellers, drew on the vast shared treasury. What really lay in the crypt? Right. Let's keep a cool head, soberly consider what's behind all this. Here, the standard work of rational vampire research helps us. Paul Barber's Vampires, Burial and Death, published in 1988 by Yale University Press. And Barber's thesis is as simple as it is brilliant. The vampire belief is essentially a pre-scientific theory of decomposition. Imagine an epidemic raging through villages. People die one after the other, and nobody understands why. In their desperation, they open a suspect grave. And what do they find? A corpse that does not look the way they expect. It's bloated from the gases of decay, and looks as if it were gorged with blood. There's blood foam at the mouth. The skin has discolored, often dark red. The gums have receded. The skin of the fingers has shrunk. And so the teeth, nails and hair appear to have grown. Move the corpse and a sound escapes, a groan, gas passing by the vocal cords. And drive in a stake and it hisses and the blood wells up. To us today, perfectly ordinary stages of decomposition. To a frightened peasant in the 17th century, irrefutable proof that this dead person walks by night and feeds on the living. The Striga was not a lie. She was the best explanation that people without a microscope, without germ theory, without pathology could find for a horrifying reality. She was their forensics, their epidemiology, their desperate attempt to give the senseless dying a meaning, a name, a face. Who was the monster really? And with that, we arrive at our guiding question. Who tells the story of the Striga and why? Look once more at who became a Striga. The child born with 2 rows of teeth, the child with the caul, with the red hair, with the joined brow, the unbaptized child, the woman who was different, who was ill, who died too soon or too strangely. In other words, the Striga was almost always a person at the margin, the other, the conspicuous one, the one a tight-knit village community feared because they didn't fit the pattern. And it's no accident that it was so often a woman. Follow the trail we've laid today. The Strix, the ancient bird witch, the Lamia of the Greeks, the Romanian Striga, Soccia and Pień with the sickle across the throat, and finally, in Sapkowski, Princess Edda, a child conceived in incest, born in shame, cursed before it could even breathe. A whole lineage of female monsters telling us something across the centuries about the fear of female power, of the female body, of birth, of the wrong woman. The Striga is, if you like, a diagnosis, but not of the dead, rather of the living, who dreamed her up. She tells us of a world in which the incomprehensible was punished, in which a dead girl was pinned into the ground with a sickle because no one understood the plague had taken her, in which being different could be a death sentence, even beyond death. Closing thoughts. And now picture once more the 2 heroes we began with today. Marcin, the pious boy from the year 1852, who conquers the beast through his prayer and redeems the princess. And Geralt, the weary professional from the year 1986, who climbs into the crypt for money and crawls back out with his throat torn open. Both fight the same monster, but only one of them asks the question that truly matters, and it is ironically the hard-bitten mercenary, not the pious hero, because Geralt knows the Striga is not a demon to be destroyed. She's a cursed child who can be redeemed. Behind the monster, there is a human being. Behind the clattering teeth, a little girl who never really had a chance. Perhaps that's the greatest shift in this whole long story. For more than 2,000 years, we told the Striga as the thing we feared, as the owl at the window, the dead woman in the field, the girl who was different. And only late, very late, did we learn to turn the question around. No longer, how do we protect ourselves from her, but what did we do to her? Who was Soccia before they laid the sickle across her throat? Who was Edda before they cursed her? The monster, dear friends, is rarely the thing that climbs out of the grave at night. The monster, far more often, is the fear that we put in there. Next time we leave the crypt and the grave behind and step out into the deep ancient forest. There a being awaits that is as old as the trees themselves. A lord over beast and branch, half guardian spirit, half nightmare. The Lashy, and he, I promise you, is a wholly different kind of monster, because for the first time in our series, it's a he. Until then, if you hear a scraping at night beneath your feet, a faint clattering of teeth, count and make sure all your grains are still where you left them. Sleep well. Yours, Chris.